Placing his hand on his son's casket, Stephen Foster allowed a tear to drip into the sea of humanity that would soon be drowning in Xindi blood as his elite super soldiers awoke from cryosleep, ready to tear a bloodthirsty swath through the heart of the Galactic Empire. Stephen stood there, eyes fixed straight ahead, staring into the abyss that had robbed him of his son, his small, still chest unable to rise and fall with the breath of life so cruelly torn away. There would be speeches, of course. Allergies and tributes, words of remembrance and regret, odes to the innocents lost, to the mission of peace so treacherously betrayed. None of it mattered to Stephen now. Peace was a lie. There could be no truce with monsters, no accord with an adversary so ruthless, so devoid of honor. The Galactic Empire believed themselves beyond the reach of justice, that they murdered human children with impunity while humanity cowered in their shadow. The Xindi would soon learn how gravely they had erred. For when the phantoms rose from their long slumber, when Stephen's brothers and sisters in arms took to the stars with murder in their hearts, an empire would tremble and the galaxy would run red with Xindi blood. Stephen's eyes flicked to the chronometer on the wall. 1 hour remaining until he would depart to the black site to begin the sequence that would awaken the phantoms from their cryostasis. An hour to maintain this facade, this illusion of grief and helplessness. Inside, anticipation built behind a dam of steely conviction and righteous fury. Aiden had been his life, his joy, his future. Now Stephen had only the mission, the burden of delivering retribution against a foe that believed themselves invincible. He would gladly bear that weight, embrace the totality of its purpose, for the Xindi had sown the wind, and now they would reap the whirlwind. Stephen's hand slipped from the polished wood of the casket. He turned his back to it, spine straightening as he strode towards the exit, towards destiny, towards war. The phantoms were waiting. It was time to begin. The maglev train shot through the Rocky Mountains like a bullet, slicing through darkness and stone. Stephen sat rigidly in the front cabin, knuckles white on his armrests. The secret facility lay deep underground, accessible only by this clandestine route from Cheyenne Mountain. With a gentle lurch, the train slid into the subterranean station. Stephen stood as the doors whooshed open, revealing a figure in a crisp white lab coat. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, the mastermind behind the Phantom program. General Foster, Nakamura said, bowing slightly. Everything is prepared. Please follow me. They strode down gleaming corridors, footsteps echoing. Nakamura spoke briskly, detailing the status of the cryogenic pods that held Stephen's brothers and sisters in arms. Phantoms, the product of the gene wars when humanity turned on itself in a battle over the ethics and consequences of genetic enhancement. Soldiers of the highest caliber, unmatched in skill and lethality. Their vitals are strong, Nakamura said. The pods have maintained homeostasis for all inhabitants over the decades. We can begin the reanimation sequence on your order. Awake them, Stephen said simply. They entered a cavernous room lined with pods, a hibernation den for sleeping giants. Stephen walked among them, gazing at the faces of his phantoms. Captain Marcus Reeves, his right hand, a tactical genius. Sergeant Liam O'Connor, deadly with any weapon, the best infiltrator he'd ever known. One by one, the pods hissed open, bodies stirred, eyes fluttering. Nakamura's assistants swarmed, checking vitals, offering water. When all the phantoms were on their feet, Stephen cleared his throat. Soldiers, he began. I know you have questions. The war, it ended long ago. We were victorious, but the cost was high. In the years since, a new threat has emerged. The Xindi, an alien empire, ruthless and cruel. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Stephen held up a hand. They have taken much from us, from me. My son, his voice faltered for a moment. My son is dead, murdered by Xindi assassins. A child killed to send a message. Growls of anger, fists clenching. The fury of the phantoms was a palpable thing. This cannot stand, Stephen continued. We cannot let this injustice go unanswered. So I ask you, my brothers and sisters, will you fight with me once more? Will you bring the reckoning to these monsters and show them the true might of humanity?" The roar of assent was deafening. Stephen nodded, grim satisfaction etched on his features. "Then let us begin. Dr. Nakamura will brief you on the armaments and equipment at your disposal: advanced exosuits, energy weapons, stealth ships, tools to help you reap a bloody toll." "We're with you, General," Reeves said, stepping forward, "to the end." "Aye," O'Connor agreed. "For your boy, for all of Earth. We'll make them pay." As the phantoms dispersed to arm themselves, Stephen allowed himself a small cold smile. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. Fair soon the Xindi would learn the true meaning of vengeance. The phantoms trained relentlessly in the secret facility, sparring, drilling, familiarizing themselves with their new gear. But Stephen couldn't be there every moment. He had meetings to attend topside, including a critical one with Earth's Leadership Council. The conference room was tense as Stephen laid out his audacious plan. Admiral Inouye leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "A preemptive strike against the Xindi. Foster, that's madness. It'll bring their full might down on our heads." General Okwemba shook his head. "If we cower now, they'll only see weakness. We must show strength, resolve. Hit them hard enough to make them think twice about targeting us again." The debate raged, voices rising. Stephen let them argue, waiting for a lull. When it came, he spoke firmly. "The phantoms can do this. Surgical strikes on critical Xindi assets. Not a full-scale war, but a message. We can cripple their ability to retaliate while demonstrating our capability and will to resist." President Zhu rubbed her chin thoughtfully. "And you believe your team can pull this off without drawing Earth into a shooting war?" Stephen nodded. "We have a secret weapon, an AI called Athena, born in the Gene Wars. It can infiltrate Xindi systems, disable them from within. They may be technologically superior, but not with Athena in play." Silence stretched as they considered. Finally, Zhu sighed. "The phantoms may proceed, but if this blows up in our faces, we never had this conversation. Earth cannot be tied to this." "Understand." "Perfectly," Stephen said. Back at the facility, the phantoms were deep in preparation. Reeves and O'Connor pored over intelligence reports identifying targets. Prince Talon's flagship was priority one along with several key military installations. Stephen gathered the team looking into each face. "Remember, this isn't just about vengeance for Aiden. It's about the future, humanity's place in the stars. We have to show the galaxy that we will not be victims, that even in the face of superior power, we will not bend or break." Fierce nods all around. They understood. This was bigger than any one of them. "Double-check your gear," Stephen ordered. "We move out at 400, dismissed." As the phantoms scattered to their tasks, Stephen allowed himself a moment to breathe, to remember Aiden's smile, the weight of his small hand in his own. "I'll make this right, son," he whispered. "I swear it." Then he straightened, the mantle of command settling on his shoulders. It was time to go to war. The sleek phantom stealth ship knifed through the void, its hull swallowing light, rendering it all but invisible. On the bridge, Stephen stood with Raider and Ghost watching the Xindi border loom on their view screen. "Athena status report," Stephen called out. The AI's mellifluous voice filled the room. "Xindi sensor nets are blind to our approach, General. We will reach the shipyard undetected." Stephen nodded, his face carved from stone. "Ghost, prep your team for infiltration. Raider, find me a weak point in that shipyard's defenses. It's time we sent our message." The shipyard hung in space, a sprawling complex of glittering metal and pulsing lights. Newly constructed warships nestled in its docks, deadly and dormant. Ghost's insertion shuttle drifted closer, a whisper in the darkness. "In position," Ghost reported over the comm. "Athena, work your magic." Athena's intrusion slithered through the Xindi systems, a ghost in the machine. Security doors unlocked, sensors flickered and died. Confusion spread like a virus through the station. Ghost and his team slipped aboard, nothing more than shadows flitting through corridors. They moved with purpose, magnetic clamps allowing them to scale the immense skeleton of a half-built warship. Ghost armed the charges, placing them at critical junctures with the sculptor's precision. On the Phantom ship, radar zeroed in on the shipyard's beating heart. "There," he said, pointing at a pulsing mass on the schematic. "The primary reactor core. If we hit that, the whole place will go supernova." Stephen leaned forward, eyes hard. "Take the shot." Raider's fingers danced across the console, locking onto the target. A heartbeat later, a lance of pure energy shot forth from the Phantom ship, an incandescent spear that pierced the shipyard's shielding like it was gossamer. The reactor core detonated, a miniature sun erupting into life. Ghost and his team leaped from the disintegrating warship, thrusters flaring as they rocketed back to their shuttle. The shipyard convulsed, secondary explosions rippling through its superstructure as the fires spread, an unstoppable tide of destruction. In the royal palace on the Xindi homeworld, Prince Talon slammed his fist onto the polished table, his face twisted in a snarl as he watched the footage of the shipyard's annihilation. "Find out who did this," he growled at his assembled advisors. "I want them hunted down and exterminated like the vermin they are. No one attacks the Xindi Empire and lives." Light years away, Stephen allowed himself a small, cold smile. The prince's reaction was exactly as he had anticipated. "Athena," he said softly, "it's time for Phase 2. Leak the information about the rebel base on Theris Prime. Let's see if we can lure our prey into the open." The AI pulsed in acknowledgement, already worming its way into Xindi intelligence networks, carefully placing the breadcrumbs that would lead Talon to the trap. All they had to do now was wait for the prince to take the bait, and when he did, Stephen would be there ready to look into the eyes of the monster who had stolen his son's future, ready to make him pay for his sins. The Theris system was a backwater, its planets either barren rocks or toxic hellscapes. The fourth world, Theris Prime, was the only one that could charitably be called habitable, a bleak expanse of wind-scored plains broken by jagged mountain ranges. The perfect place for a rebel outpost or a trap. Stephen stood on the bridge of the Phantom ship, watching the sensors intently. They had been in orbit for a day now. The ship nestled in the sensor shadow of one of Theris Prime's moons, waiting for their quarry to arrive. The plot had worked flawlessly. Intercepted Xindi transmissions showed that Talon had taken the bait, his flagship racing toward Theris Prime with murder on its mind. Contacts on long-range scanners, radar reported, his eyes locked on his display. Xindi warships coming in hot. "How many?" Stephen asked, his voice calm. "6 escorts," Raider replied, "and 1 heavy cruiser. It's the Talon's flagship, the Imperator." Stephen nodded, his eyes chips of ice. "Athena, you're up. Let's roll out the welcome mat for our guests." As the Xindi ships drew closer, Athena slipped into their systems, her digital tendrils penetrating firewalls and burrowing into core systems. On the bridge of the Imperator, alarms began to wail as consoles flickered and died. "Status report." Talon barked, gripping the arms of his command chair. "We're being hacked, sire," one of his officers replied, her fingers flying over her terminal. "Weapons are offline. Shields are down. We're dead in the water." Talon's eyes widened in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. His ship was the pride of the Xindi fleet, its systems hardened against any intrusion. And yet, here he was, helpless, vulnerable. "Sire, incoming ship," another officer shouted. It's the humans." The Phantom ship decloaked off the Imperator's bow, its sleek lines making it look like a dagger hanging in space. In the next instant, boarding pods erupted from its flanks, streaking towards the crippled Xindi flagship. "All hands prepare to repel boarders," Talon commanded, rising from his chair and drawing his sidearm. He would not cower before these primates. He was a prince of the Xindi, and he would fight to his last breath. The boarding pods slammed into the Imperator's hull, disgorging Phantom soldiers into the corridors of the ship. Xindi crewmen rushed to meet them. energy beams crisscrossing through the air as the battle was joined. Stephen was at the forefront, a rifle in his hands and vengeance in his heart. His phantoms moved with him, an unstoppable tide of elite warriors cutting through the Jindy resistance like a plasma torch through steel. Deck by deck, they fought their way to the bridge, leaving a trail of broken Cindy bodies in their wake. At last, they stood before the final door, the entrance to the Imperator's command center. Stephen turned to his soldiers, his brothers and sisters in arms. "This is it," he said, his voice hard. "Behind this door is the creature who murdered my son, who thinks he can strike at humanity without consequence. Let's show him how wrong he is." With a nod to Raider, Stephen stepped forward as the door hissed open. The bridge was in chaos, Shindy officers scrambling frantically at their posts, trying in vain to restore systems. And there, in the center of it all, was Prince Talon, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You," the prince spat, raising his weapon. "You dare to attack me? I'll have your head for this human." Stephen said nothing. He simply raised his rifle and put a shot into Talon's hand, sending the prince's sidearm clattering to the deck. In the next instant, he was on him, moving with a speed and strength that no unaugmented human could match. Talon reeled back but recovered quickly, lashing out with a flurry of blows. He was fast, strong, a product of Cindy genetic engineering, but Stephen was faster, stronger, and he had justice on his side. They traded blows in a brutal ballet, fists and feet crashing against each other with bone-shattering force. But for all his skill, for all his superior Shind biology, Talon was no match for a phantom, for a father's righteous fury. Stephen's final punch sent the prince crashing to the deck, his face a ruined mess of purple blood. Stephen stood over him, chest heaving, knuckles split and bleeding. "You killed my son," he said softly, each word etched in granite. "An innocent boy. Did you think there would be no reckoning, no retribution?" Talon spat a goblet of blood onto the deck. "Do it then, human," he snarled. "Take your revenge. It changes nothing. Your species is still doomed." Stephen shook his head. "No, you don't get off that easy." He reached down, hauling the prince up by the front of his uniform. "You're coming back to Earth with me, to stand trial for your crimes. The galaxy will see you for what you are, a murderer, a monster." Stephen turned to Raider, ignoring the look of stunned disbelief on Talon's face. "Get this piece of filth to the brig, and send a message to Earth. We're coming home. We're bringing the Butcher of Centauri with us." In the bowels of the Phantom stealth ship, Stephen stood over a hollow table, his eyes fixed on the revolving image of the Xindi homeworld. Around him, the remaining Phantoms gathered, their faces grim. They had struck a mighty blow against the Xindi, but their work was not yet done. "Our final target," Stephen said, his voice hard. "The serpent's head. We cut it off, and the body dies." He tapped a command, zooming in on a sprawling complex of spires and domes. "This is the Imperial Palace, the seat of Cindy power. And this," another tap, highlighting a pulsing nexus of data streams, "the central communications hub. From here, the Emperor's words reach every corner of the Empire." Stephen looked up, meeting the eyes of each Phantom in turn. "We're going to hijack that hub, broadcast evidence of Talon's crimes, show the Xindi people the truth about their rulers, and when the time is right, I'll speak to them directly. Give them a choice, a chance to be free." Ghost stepped forward, his face a mask of determination. "We're with you, General, to the end." Stephen clasped his shoulder, nodding, "To the end." As the Phantom ship sliced through the void towards the Xindi homeworld, Stephen felt a growing sense of unease. Something wasn't right. They should have encountered patrols by now, challenge and response. But space remained empty, silent. Too silent. The alarm klaxon shattered the stillness, red light flooding the bridge. Multiple contacts, Raider shouted from the sensor station. Xindi ships coming in hot. On the view screen, space lit up with the flare of engines. a swarm of Cindy warships descending upon them like angry hornets. At their center, a massive dreadnought, its hull bristling with cannon turrets. "That's a trap," Stephen snarled. "They knew we were coming, but how?" There was no time to ponder the question. The Xindi opened fire, lances of energy stabbing out at the Phantom ship. The stealth vessel shuddered as its shields absorbed the blows, alarms wailing. "Evasive maneuvers," Stephen barked. "Ghost Raider on the guns. Take as many of them with us as you can." The Phantoms leaped to their stations, hands flying over consoles. The ship jinked and wove, narrowly evading the barrage of enemy fire. Ghost and Raider worked in tandem, coordinated blasts from the ship's pulse cannons and torpedoes, striking Xindi ships, turning them into blossoms of fire. But it wasn't enough. For every ship they destroyed, 2 more took its place. The dreadnought advanced implacably, its shields shrugging off the Phantom's attacks. "We can't win this," Vader said grimly. "There's too many of them." Stephen stared at the tactical display, his mind racing. Then a grim resolve settled over him. "No, but we can finish it." He turned to Ghost and Raider, his expression somber. "I need you to buy us time. Keep that dreadnought off our backs." Understanding flickered in their eyes. They knew what he was asking. A final sacrifice so that the mission could succeed. Ghost nodded, his jaw tight. "We'll give you your opening, General. Make it count." The 2 Phantoms sprinted from the bridge heading for the escape pods. Moments later, 2 small craft ejected from the Phantom ship, streaking towards the dreadnought. "For Earth," Ghost whispered over the calm. "For the fallen." "For the future," Raider replied. Their pods slammed into the dreadnought's shield, the impact barely registering, but they hadn't intended to breach it. Instead, the pods detonated antimatter charges, turning them into miniature suns. The blasts engulfed the dreadnought, its shields flickering and dying under the onslaught. Secondary explosions rippled across its hull as power systems overloaded, the mighty ship listing drunkenly. "Now," Stephen shouted. Engines flaring, the Phantom ship dove past the crippled dreadnought, racing for the Xindi homeworld. Behind them, the dreadnought crumpled in on itself before shattering in a titanic explosion, taking a dozen nearby ships with it. In the chaos, the Phantom ship reached the planet's atmosphere, plummeting towards the surface like a falling star. Stephen's hands flew over the helm controls, fighting to keep the ship steady as it shook and bucked, hull glowing cherry red from the heat of re-entry. With a bone-jarring impact, the ship slammed into the ground, carving a deep furrow into the earth before finally grinding to a halt. Stephen picked himself up from the deck, his head ringing. Around him, the remaining Phantoms did the same, checking each other for injuries. "Everyone all right?" Stephen asked. Nods all around. They were battered, but unbroken. "Good. Grab your gear. We're not done yet." The Imperial Palace loomed before them, its spires piercing the smoke-filled sky. Around its base, Xindi soldiers swarmed like ants, setting up barricades and gun emplacements. The Phantoms charged forward, a blur of motion, their exosuits enhancing their speed and strength. They hit the Xindi lines like a thunderbolt, scattering soldiers and smashing through barriers. Energy beams crisscrossed the air, the sizzle of ozone mixing with the cries of the wounded and dying. The Phantoms pushed forward relentlessly, a wedge driving into the heart of the Xindi defenses. Stephen was at the tip of that wedge, his rifle spitting blue-white bolts of superheated plasma. Beside him, the other Phantoms fought with grim determination, their weapons cutting swaths through the enemy ranks. Step by blood-soaked step, they fought their way into the palace, leaving a trail of Xindi dead in their wake. At last, they stood before the doors to the communications hub, the final obstacle in their path. "Athena, you're up," Stephen said. The AI pulsed in acknowledgement, its digital tendrils snaking out, warming into the palace's systems. With a hiss of hydraulics, the massive doors slid open, revealing the pulsing heart of the Xindi information network. Stephen and the Phantoms stormed inside, sweeping the room for threats. Technicians and guards alike fell before their onslaught, until only the humming banks of servers and transmission equipment remained. "Upload the package," Duseven ordered. Athena went to work hijacking the Xindi broadcast network. On every screen, every holographic display across the planet, evidence of Talon's crimes began to play. Recordings of his orders to murder human children, intercepted transmissions gloating over the suffering he had caused. And then Stephen's face filled the screens, his eyes hard as flint. "People of the Xindi," he began, "my name is General Stephen Foster. I am a human, a species your rulers have taught you to hate and fear. They have told you that we are weak, that we are prey." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. They lied. Images flashed across the screens, the Phantom ship destroying the dreadnought. Xindi soldiers falling before the might of the Phantoms, the Imperial Palace in ruins. "We are not victims," Stephen continued. "We are not playthings for your princes and emperors. We are human beings, and we demand to be treated as such." Across the Xindi homeworld, stunned silence gave way to a rising murmur of shock and outrage. In the streets, crowds began to gather, staring up at the screens with growing anger. "Your leaders have built their empire on a foundation of cruelty and oppression," Stephen said. "They have enslaved and slaughtered countless innocents, and now the bill has come due." He spread his hands, his expression somber. "But I am not here to be your conqueror. I am here to offer you a choice, a chance to build a better future free from the tyranny of the past. All I ask is that the transmission cut off abruptly as an energy beam slammed into the communications hub, exploding servers and consoles in a shower of sparks and shrapnel." Stephen whirled, rifle raised, to see Emperor Zakir standing in the doorway, a smoking blaster in his hand and murder in his eyes. "You," the Emperor hissed. "You dare to challenge me in my own palace?" Stephen smiled coldly. "Your reign is over, Zakir. Your people know the truth now. They will never follow you again." Zakir's face twisted in rage. "Then I will rule over their ashes." He charged forward, discarding his blaster and drawing a crackling energy blade. Stephen met him head-on, his rifle clattering to the floor as he engaged the Emperor in hand-to-hand combat. They'd fought like demons, trading blows that would have shattered normal men. Stephen's exosuit wind with the strain, servos and hydraulics pushed to their limits as he matched Zakir's genetically enhanced strength. But for all his power, Zakir was no match for a Phantom's skill and fury. Stephen pressed his advantage, driving the Emperor back with a relentless flurry of strikes. And then an opening. Stephen lunged forward, his fist slamming into Zakir's chest with a sickening crunch. The Emperor staggered, his eyes wide with shock and pain. But even as he fell, Zakir lashed out with his blade in one final desperate strike. The crackling energy blade sliced through Stephen's armor like paper, burning into his flesh. Stephen fell to his knees, blood pooling beneath him. Around him, the other Phantom surged forward, subduing the last of the Xindi guards, but Stephen barely noticed, his vision tunneling, his breath coming in ragged gasps. With the last of his strength, he dragged himself to the shattered remains of the communications hub, his blood-slick fingers scrabbling for the backup transmitter. "Athena," he whispered, "send the signal." Far above, in orbit around the Xindi homeworld, a single satellite blinked to life. It began to broadcast a pre-recorded message, Stephen's final words to the people of Earth. "This is General Stephen Foster," the message began. "If you're hearing this, then our mission is complete. The Xindi threat has been neutralized." But the cost, he coughed, a wet, wrenching sound. The cost was high. Stephen's eyes fluttered closed, his breath coming in shallow rasps. In his mind's eye, he saw Aiden's face, smiling up at him, beckoning him home. "Tell my wife," he whispered. "Tell her I'm sorry, and that I love." His words trailed off, his hand falling limp at his side. On the screen, his final message continued to play, flickering light washing over his still features. "But though we may fall," his recorded voice said, "our cause endures. The Phantom's humanity will live on because of the sacrifices we made today, because of the courage and determination of those who fought and died to secure our future. Across the Xindi homeworld, the people listened in stunned silence, the weight of Stephen's words sinking in. And then, like a rising tide, they began to move, to tear down the symbols of the old regime, to storm the bastions of imperial power. The revolution had begun. In the ruins of the communications hub, the surviving phantoms gathered around Stephen's body, their heads bowed in grief and respect. They had won the day, but the cost had been higher than any of them had dared to imagine. And yet, as they looked out over the burning city at the crowds of Xindi tearing down the monuments to their former masters, they knew that Stephen's sacrifice had not been in vain. A new dawn was rising, a future free from the shackles of tyranny and oppression, a future bought with the blood of heroes. The phantoms stood tall, ready to face that future head-on, for they were the guardians of humanity, the shield and sword of Earth, and they would never stop fighting. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.